Hey y'all, how we doing? This is a one-time only host, Rob Napoli. I am filling in as the host of the Genius Leadership podcast with Anna Leibel because I'm going to be interviewing Anna this episode as we bring this full circle journey of the Genius Leadership podcast to a close as Anna has made a decision to step away from the podcasting world for a little bit as she has taken on so many things and her career continues to grow and scale. And I wanted to, well, it was my honor to be asked to lead the conversation for this last episode and turn the table around a little bit and have an introspection with Anna on the podcast, what it meant, what was learned, lessons, trials, tribulations, and really talk about the reasoning why. So, Anna, welcome to your own show, but this time as a guest.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for the intro. And I love that you said about the full circle moment because this show started with the first episode which was interviewing the interviewer. I didn't know you then. It was another friend of mine who was interviewing me, just for the listeners to get to know me. And it's an honor for me that you took up on this job and you accepted my offer of or my question of being the interviewer, because you've been on the show, you're a dear friend to me, you know me as a podcaster, as the coach, as a coachee. So I felt like there is no better person to bring this journey to a full circle.
Well, I love that, and I am very honored and appreciative. And yeah, it's interesting on how the podcast journey goes because if we look at the Genius Leadership Podcast and what you've accomplished, you started the podcast, if I'm not mistaken, 2021, January,
Yep,
right? So we're
exactly.
looking, we're sitting here at the end of 24, so 3 years, 200 plus episodes. I think if I remember correctly, you said this is like 205.
Yep.
So 203 episodes where you interviewing people with 2 episodes of you being interviewed. One, meet the interviewer back before your podcasting journey started. And now we're interviewing you 200 plus episodes later, 3 years into this journey. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So, of course, honored and excited and glad that you allowed me to share this with listeners out there. So let's dive into a few things because I'm sure this episode is gonna go in different ups and downs and twists and turns, and sure that some of it will be emotional. And as you always, as you end one chapter, it's always fun to reflect, but also brings up a groundswell of emotions. So the first question I have for you is think back to January 2021 and that first episode. What were your expectations for this podcast?
Oof. Then I was mainly looking for a medium or a channel where I could create content in a way that felt good to me. Because in that moment, end of 2020, during the pandemic, it was all about the short term or short form, and I really suck at that. By now, I kind of got better at it, but I really didn't like it, and it didn't feel good to me. I felt like I need more words, I need some more space to say what I wanted to say. And podcasting felt like a really good medium for me to learn myself. I enjoy it a lot myself, and I felt like could be a good way for me to build relationships that I have been building, to bring them into the spotlight instead of having them just one to one on Zoom with people, but also at the same time to share what I have to say with my audience in a way that felt
Yeah.
good to me.
Yeah, I love that. I know we always, and for the listeners who maybe have heard an episode of ours before in the past, Anna, you and I have known each other for a couple years now, a few years
Yeah.
now. We met randomly over LinkedIn to be a guest on your show, and through that started a friendship. Different times of our career, you coached me, I coached you. Sometimes it's just, you know, calling and just it's a therapy session by of just like complaining. You nicknamed me DK for Drama King, and I know that
Not
you've told a few.
you. That's
Not
one
me.
of the alter egos.
Exactly, exactly. And so, for those out there, this is such a cool thing, and that's why I love to be able to cover this with you. And we've gotten to know each other well, and short form content is hard, and it's something that's very trendy, and obviously for reasons why, but still looking for a place and a space where the medium where you can actually share thoughts. And having a podcast and mediums like this has made it easier for than ever to really be able to be at the forefront and share those things in a way that makes you feel comfortable. And we'll get into it, but it's opened up so many opportunities for you, and we'll get into that here a little bit later in the show. So I know that the why you started it or your expectation was to have a space to have a medium, but when you're thinking about the topic and you're thinking about what you hoped listeners would gather, what was the inspiration behind that? What was the reasoning that you wanted to have this space in a medium where you could actually share what you had to say?
Mm. Well, one of the working topic or working titles were for the podcast when I was planning it and strategizing around it was something about the overnight success in the making. So it was about all this like phrases like overnight success is built over 10 years, so happens over 10 years, etc. And I felt like there was so much, especially in 2020 when I was building this and creating it. It was so much about getting rich quick, getting successful quick, getting big quick, and growing bigger and sooner, and etc. And I felt like that's not what we need to talk about. And I really wanted to counter that. And the conversations that was having with people one to one felt like I was not the only one who didn't resonate with that
Mhm,
narrative. And then I was also thinking about this idea of zone of genius, and that has been the topic a lot on the podcast in different shapes and forms. And it was about like how do I help people find their zone of genius? How do I
mhm,
get them inspired and also give them a practical tools to be in that zone as much as possible? Because that's the place where we actually get the satisfaction from our life
mhm.
and feel like we are fulfilled. We're bringing something good into the world and building our impact. So that was the topic that I wanted to bring to the show.
And I love that because when we think about this idea of mind shifting, as you are a mind shifting coach, you do a lot of workshops and webinars, and now a teacher, professor, all the things that you do, talking about and really around how do you find your passion and where do you best thrive, right? And that's really interesting. And I love this idea because I was literally just talking about this the other day on another podcast with someone about how 95% of our life is practice for the 5% of being in the spotlight, whether that's an athlete, a musician, a singer, all these things that we have is that so much of our life is practicing, is putting in the work. And so this idea of overnight success, yeah, it kind of popped up in this more entrepreneurial society. And I think we've used overnight success too liberally in the fact that, yes, people are now making money faster and having success faster because access to things are quicker, but true success, true mastery is in the process, right? It's chop wood, carry water. It's the daily things that you have to do to find that. And so it's one of the things we always talk about is finding that zone of genius. It doesn't happen 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. It happens in spurts and stuff. So I think that's really cool as we've gotten into that. And so as that was the ideation of it, when you look back, what have been what stands out to you? What are some of those moments of the podcast, really, as it relates to that theme that you started this whole thing with?
Oof, there were so many, I guess. It was such a journey and has so much has changed. So you mentioned there are over 200 episodes, and in the beginning it was just interviews, and then I started building this series with those interviews. So I would do 1 month, one theme. So it would be 3 or 4 guests, depending on how many weeks there are, how many Wednesdays there are in the month, and one would be tying it all together. So that would become a solo episodes. In the beginning, those solo episodes were explaining the theme. Uh, Talking about why I bring that to the audience and explain how those dots of the different guests connect to each other. And then I started bringing recordings of my master classes as the episodes.
Mhm.
And I realized that those performed really well and people reached out to me. So I started doing solo episodes. And now it's around 50-50 with guests and solo episodes. So for me, that was a big transformation and way of finding my own voice instead of just saying, thinking, okay, I'm really good at opening space and asking good questions and really having a good conversation, getting into depth. that's what I wanted to bring originally because people whom I talked to were saying those things to me, and I was like, why do I keep those conversations to myself? But then gradually I started figuring out that oh, I can also create a conversation myself, and I can
Mhm.
actually teach myself, and that was, I think, a big step for me to kind of put the spotlight on myself instead of me being the spotlight for the interviewee only. So, and that was a gradual thing. It wasn't like one moment. It was those smaller steps, so to say, with the journey. With the Genius Leadership, there were, of course, a lot of episodes that I keep thinking about, a lot of guests who I get back to in my head, whom I quote in different conversations, in the content, etc., or in my client sessions. So I think it would be a disservice to them to start naming them because there are just so many that feel relevant at different points in different conversations in different contexts.
I love that. I mean, the correct answer for the best guest ever would have been me, FYI.
Wow, you're here on the third for the third time. That's the only guest.
um, you know, and I love that you shared this, putting the spotlight on you, because one of the things that I have found most intriguing through my own podcasting journey, but really watching yours, is the lessons that we've learned through hosting, through whether that's interviewing somebody and sharpening those skills, because interviewing somebody and leading a conversation and guiding is not easy, but also to do it yourself and really have a look into the lens or look into the mirror of what you're trying to say and how do you say it. So when you think about that, what are some of the big lessons that you've learned about you
Mm,
throughout this process of the last 3 years, 200
mm.
episodes? What are things that maybe surprised you about yourself going through this journey?
Well, I recently reflected talking to some other friends who are podcasters as well, how natural I am at it now. Natural or good, I wouldn't know. So I'm just thinking back to my master studies when to make a presentation, I would actually write out the whole script and I would try to work like learn it word by word, those two
Hmm.
pages of my presentation of the text, full text and going from that and being nervous. And I remember my presentations, even like especially one of them, one of the bigger ones in Sweden. I really remember the room. I really remember where some people, some of my peers were sitting in the room, etc. And how I was over using my body too much, and my hands were just all over the place, so that people would not see how shaky they are.
Hmm.
And coming from that space to now jotting down 3 bullet points, hitting record, and just creating an episode that way, that has been a huge journey. And now it feels supernatural. But given that journey, it's probably not a natural thing. But again,
Yeah.
as you said, it's a lot of practice.
Hmm.
So getting in the reps, doing it, not being perfect, not aiming to be perfect. So many of my podcasts are not perfect. If I would listen to them with a critical perspective, I would find a gazillion things that were
Hmm.
imperfect and how I said things, how I could have said it in a shorter way, used better words, whatever. But for me, it was about just journey of like doing it, getting it out. And I think the thing that I'm proud of with that is that I really stayed consistent. That every Wednesday there would be something. Of course, I took breaks. It was mainly during the summer vacation and December when I know that people get busy. They want to step away from their routines, including
Hmm.
usual podcasts that they listen to. But I also wanted to give this breather for myself and my team. So
Hmm.
I took those breaks. But other than that, I was showing up. And when my team, for example, in the beginning of the full-scale invasion back home in Ukraine, were not able to work on those, I would just record and without editing put out the episode myself or use something that has been in the pipeline for further down the line, but I would launch it, etc. So I think this consistency is something I also learned from this journey with the podcast, that if I have a passion for something, I know that I can
Hmm.
overcome the challenges and I can really stick to it. And it helped me with confidence in other things, both in business and in personal life, for sure.
Yeah. I really think that's an important piece there is one, your presentation style changed. And, even though the podcast is virtual, it's still, because you're being filmed, it still makes you think very diligently about every motion, movement, sound, and the way you do things. But then to be able to go for memorization, because I'm the other way, right? Like I can just wing it at any time, any place. And at times I need to put those bullet points to provide structure for myself. To learn those lessons, I think is really cool. But it's kind of the end that I thought was something that really you highlighted that I think is the biggest switch is your ability to be consistent and putting out great content and not letting perfection get in the way of good. And if you look at the podcasting space now, some of the best podcasts, if you go back and look at the early episodes, you're kind of like, ooh, it's come a long way. But that's natural, right? That's putting yourself out there. And for you to put yourself out there in a very public way with a podcast in long form content, it's a lot. And I think that big switch of just consistently growing and learning and the confidence is such a cool lesson. It definitely comes off, I think, for you in the way that you carry yourself and the way we talk and the way that you really drive stuff forward. And that's something that I always like to tell people. Everyone asks about, my confidence speaking. I'm nervous most of the time. I just enjoy the thrill. And the thing is that every time I do it, whether it's a podcast, whether it's on stage, whether it's whatever, it's likely not going to be perfect. Everyone, you know this specifically, I cuss a lot. I'm bound to say a cuss word or make a joke that doesn't land or, you know, just do something stupid. That's life. That's people. And just to be able to be okay with letting the idea of perfection go and just put good out and get even better back is huge.
I think it's so important with the perfectionism, letting it go if you care for something. Because we think that we're perfectionists because we care.
Mhm.
But what I see with the podcaster friends who have brilliant episodes in their pocket, but they don't let them out because they haven't tweaked this last sentence yet, or they haven't edited exactly how they want it. And lo and behold, that episode has been sitting there recorded for a year now or a year and a half. And if you care for the message to come across, let it go.
Yeah.
Really get it out of in the world, and it won't land in a perfect way, but also people will resonate with the imperfection. Just as you said, it's about being human, right?
Hmm.
Making those mistakes because no one resonates with people who are perfect. No one resonates with a message that is polished to be shiny and blinding with that shininess. So I think we need to reframe that what perfectionism actually is. It becomes between us and us reaching our goals instead of helping us to reach that goal in a better way.
I love that. Do you well, we call it Monday morning quarterbacking. So, sports, for those that aren't know American football, you play on Sundays, Monday morning, you watch the film and you critique yourself. It's called Monday morning quarterbacking. It's critiquing things after um, it's over. Hindsight's 2020. Do you regularly go back and watch all of your episodes? Do you watch them before they go live, after you record them? Do you ever
Mhm.
go through that process?
Yes and no. So I usually listen to them when they are launched. So of course I do I re-listen to parts of them uh, while preparing them to be launched because my team prepares some snippets of the episodes or they will building the teaser, for example. So I'm listening to bits and pieces here and there. And once it's recorded or once it's released, I'm listening to that more as the audience because first I'm there in the conversation as an interviewer, and then I'm there as the host that is kind of partially production responsibility, and then I just really switch on as the audience. And of course, there I try to have the ear for listening to what could I have done better and so on. And some things I've thought about many, many times, but I'm still not good at them.
Yeah.
It happens, but I do try to take something and then be mindful with that for the next episode and try to improve it 1% through listening on Wednesday mornings or Wednesday lunchtime
Hmm.
when the episodes are released.
That's awesome. I never watched or listened to the episode after it was recorded until after it was released because I knew that I would get it in my head. And once it was released, I would listen to it back and think about, could I have asked that question better? Did what I was trying to say come across? Did what they were trying to say come across, knowing the spirit of the episode? and I would take notes and use that as a reflection piece. But if
Mm.
I, going back to the perfection, if I ever watched it before it released, I probably would have been like, oh, I didn't like how I did that. I'd be overly critical and so I was just like team, like I told my team, I trust you, just put it out, and then I would listen back. And now is I resonate with you on the. I've got some podcast friends that have held episodes, and they've allowed me to listen to the episodes they've held, and they're some of the best ones.
Mm.
And it's sad that because by the time you put it out, so much has changed, and that's one thing that tends to happen. And I love that you learned that lesson early and you're able to evolve with it in the way that you ask questions and the way that you thought about preparing it and really driving that home, but also never letting it hold you back from sharing the message and putting out what you wanted to say.
Have you
When
ever recorded episodes that you never released?
I have two episodes that were never released, but those were for very specific reasons.
Mm.
One was not a good episode. No fault to fault to the guest, but I also take a lot of the blame in the fact that the content just didn't come through. It was tone deaf. It didn't have the flair. The person kind of clammed up a little bit and just didn't really open up, and so the podcast was never got deeper than a surface, and I didn't want to put that out. And then one other one was held. Um, Due to the guest before I released the episode. Some personal things happened with them, and they didn't want any of the content to come out because they were dealing with a lot of personal stuff. And so, at their request, I held that. And that one was a shame because it was a really good episode.
Mm.
Um, but I understood why, and it was their decision. They're the guest, and it was not for me to put that out when they were going through stuff that they needed to take care of. So I had the two episodes. What about you?
One. It has been this year actually, so and never actually followed up with the guest, so there's some work for me to do. And it just felt like we went all over the place and did the disservice to the topic. So just as you said, it's also a fault of the guest, but also a fault of mine as a host to not direct the conversation as I wanted it to, so that it actually would get on the depth instead of going wide.
Hmm.
And that's definitely something I need to do now, follow up with the guest. But then there have been also episodes that I wish I wouldn't have released,
Yeah,
looking back, and I'll never take them down. Uh, that's part of the journey. But there are, I feel like sometimes I did it just because I was nice. I didn't want to kind of feel like I wasted the time. But thinking back to them, I was like, we could have done it sharper, we could have gone deeper, we could have done it better for the audience sake, for the guest's sake, as their reputation
yeah.
as well. So that's also part of the journey, I think.
Absolutely. And I think for guests, I had a lot of first time guests on my show, which I thought was really cool. And I think what's awesome about doing a podcast, and I've done a couple of shows where I've talked about why I believe every business should have a podcast and everyone should try to be a guest on a podcast, a couple podcasts, even if you don't want to be a podcasting, person, like we're just guesting everywhere, but a couple good episodes, even if they're not great, because they are long form content that someone can find and learn about who you were at that time, and it could carry across years and really drive. And I had a lot of founders that I interviewed and things like that where their investors, part of the reason they invested them in the early stages were because of that podcast, and they could see the vision and the energy and those intangibles that you look for in a way that's not in front of the investor, trying to please the investor. They got to see that in its natural ability. And so that's why I love keeping it. And I've only ever asked one to be taken down that I was a guest on, not taken down, but changed because they cut a clip. They were doing a random questions and they cut a clip to
Mm,
be clickbait on a
mm,
very um,
mm,
hot button topic at the time.
mm,
And my response was like, are you kidding me? Like, absolutely not. Like this thing is not good. Like, boom. But the way that they cut it made it sound like I agreed with it. It's a
mm,
clickbait. And I was like, that's not a
mm,
clip that I allowed to have out. You need to change that and blah, blah. That's the only time I think I ever asked somebody to change something
mm,
for that
mm.
reason. Um, but yeah, I
I want to
wanna,
make a quick note on what you said. A tip that I stole, or a hack that I stole from one of my guests, Matthew Brackett. He made a Spotify list playlist of all his podcast appearances. So he could share that with people, or when you search by his name, that playlist pops up. And I did the same for myself. I told him that it was a brilliant idea, and I did it. So whoever is working on their public relationships or their brand image, I think it's a brilliant, brilliant idea to create a spotlight or a
Heck,
Spotify playlist
heck
that.
yeah, I need to do that. Like I have like a list in Excel like, with all the shows that I did and the links to it. And I never
There you
thought
go.
about condensing it into a Spotify playlist. Like,
Right,
come
right.
on.
It's such a simple idea, but it was brilliant, and I love it.
I'm also like I listen on Apple Podcasts more. Like
Mm,
that's my player of choice. But this is amazing. I love that idea. Whoever it was, thank you. I'm going to steal that. And I think that's a great tip for anyone out there. Even if it's just two or three things, put that on a
yeah,
Spotify playlist and have it findable and searchable.
yeah,
I want to switch, from a little bit of the reflection side of things to celebrating a bit of your achievements. So the podcast, 200 plus episodes, listeners in over 60 plus countries, I think 64, 65, something like that, which is absolutely amazing. What are what do you think from your perspective is the impact that you think that the podcast had to your listeners in the community that you were really looking to serve, right? We're thinking of mind shifting for entrepreneurs and leaders of companies to really find their zone of genius. What do you think the impact of the podcast was to your listeners and your community?
yeah. First of all, as I said about statistics, we've checked it before recording, and I have listeners on every continent, which I never paid attention to. That it's actually really every continent, and that is mind blowing for me. How we can talk to the whole world, literally. And talking about the impact, the first thing that comes to mind is the guests. So many guests said, "I've never thought about it that way. This is a new perspective for me. Thanks for asking it this way," etc. And for me, that was the the direct feedback, because we know it. Podcasting is a very one-way conversation. Unfortunately, we try to engage our audiences, but we see the numbers and we only hear back from a fraction of a percentage of
Mm.
those people who are listening. So most of the time, you have no idea who is the human behind the number, behind the statistics, and you're trying to guess by the numbers what really resonated, how to bring more of that kind of value to the listeners, etc. So hearing this feedback from the guests was a very valuable part for me. Understanding that they walk away from this conversation, even though they are guests and I'm trying to position them and promote them and also share their knowledge and experience with my audience, that they walked away smarter, wiser, more confident, more inspired, etc. That was a very good sign for me that we're doing something good. And then, of course, there were people who would reach out now and then and say, "Thank you so much listening to specific episode, or listening, tuning in all the time, or started listening a couple of weeks ago, catching up, so much value." Just hearing those messages or reading those messages, hearing about those thoughts from people, or people met me at the events and like, "Oh, I really love your podcast." And I was like, "Really? You listen?" Like, wow. So it was just those messages like, "Hey, this topic came really at the right time." And then if it was about the guest episode, I really tried to bring it back to the guest, like, "Hey, I got a feedback that this topic or this specific thing that you talked about was really in a good time for this person. So we're making an impact, we're making a difference." And I was always really grateful for that feedback, because it is so scarce.
Yeah.
And those, tens of thousands of downloads and streams, and it's probably, if I would count all of them, it would be 100 messages tops for these 4 years.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those things where when you think back about it, unless you're starting to see more now with the use of social and the short form clips and you kind of do like a 2 3 minute video and you get a lot of comments and that drives more downloads. That's relatively newer in the way that it's being pushed to the forefront through some really successful podcasts. And you know, when you're just getting started, it's really hard to find your foot in the community that you're serving and find the listenership. And so it is, and you have all these thousands and thousands, thousands and thousands of listeners across all these continents and all these countries, and all you can hope for because people love to tell you when you do something bad. They
Mm,
hardly like to tell you when you do something good. You just hope that if they continue listening, and for all those people out there, all the people that heard your voice, whether it was once or many, that they took something away positively, that the information you gave or the conversation you had impacted them in a way that they found value. And that's all you can really hope for. And you leverage the good messages and those things really well to validate that you're helping, that the impact you're making is good. And I think that's something that's really hard to make tangible when you're just getting started in the podcasting world, or there's a lot of podcasts out there. I think it was something like only 10% ever go past 5 episodes, and then only
Yeah.
like 5% ever make it past 50. You
Mm.
made it past 200 and continued and had listeners who shared, and people who wanted to come on and continue to join. I think that's a huge achievement in itself.
Thanks, Rob. And if we talk about the impact in the more specific terms, I think the messages that I got most often were about people feeling that they're not alone, people getting the sense of belonging, ironically, with this one-way communication, but they felt like uh, they are sharing the struggles or the challenges with the others. And that was a very important part for me. It's so much about us not sitting alone with our in our darkest moments. And that's the message I try to bring so much, because the full name of the podcast is Genius Leadership Overcoming Everything. And this overcoming where everything is about getting through this roller coaster ride, through the dips, the valleys of the journey of being an entrepreneur, being a leader, being a human as well.
Mhm.
And if I have helped just a few people with every episode to do that in the darker moment of their life, then I think that that has been the journey worth all the sweat, blood, and tears that has been
Yeah.
put in the show.
Oh, that's amazing. And I do appreciate that. Yes, while it was more focused and tailored towards entrepreneurs and leaders, the idea of genius leadership and overcoming everything is something that everyone in their career at each different stage from early on to, because not everyone goes straight from being a student to being an entrepreneur. Sometimes you go through phases of growing in the workforce and becoming a late stage entrepreneur and these different things. And I think it really resonates across generations and across different roles and responsibilities that at some point you're going to go through different struggles. They may look a little differently, but everyone has struggles and struggle to have good days and bad days. And feel that they're on fire to how do I capture that and bottle that up to use when I need it at the best time, right?
Mm, definitely.
Was there obviously from this podcast has opened up a lot for you in terms of um speaking, being able to host stages at Web Summit and doing workshops and doing corporate training. What were some of the unexpected successes or outcomes or kind of going deeper into this that really doors that were opened because of the podcast and because you had so much content that they could find and see that opened up doors for you to really step through?
Mm. Well, you mentioned several of those, getting on the stages, getting to work as a corporate trainer for global brands. But one thing, it was a big one, or first bigger win, I think. Ironically, the second guest on of the podcast. So it was the second guest episode, Hjalmar Gislason. At some point, he reached out, and it was like a year after the recording. We haven't met in person until the recording, and then we built a relationship because I really liked what they were building at Grid, and he reached out and asked whether we could do a project together. So there came business with a company I really liked on a topic that I really enjoyed. It was really
Mhm.
fun. And at that moment, it was even more impactful because we planned to do the project, the whole project within March 2022. So we agreed about it in February 22, and then the full-scale invasion started. So it was mad time, and having something that really brought me back into my zone of genius now and then, in between all the madness of dealing with emotional distress of family and the team and friends being there or leaving the country, etc. Volunteering here, working for the government. With all that, like having my sister come over here because of the war, whatnot, like having several of my one-time or one-time one-to-one clients and that project really helped me get through that process or that time without getting absolutely mad. And that was brought by the podcast in a way.
Yeah.
So that was one of the first big wins that really meant a lot to me. both personally and professionally.
I love that. What are some of the most surprising things or lessons that you've learned from your guests? Thinking about some of the great, amazing guests that you've had on, what are some of those things that have stuck with you?
The Often the podcast episodes that come to mind when we talk about impact on me are usually not about the leadership itself. It's when people bring their personal experiences into the conversation about their parenthood, about their relationships, personal relationships, about the way they grew up, what made them them. That brings a different value, a different depth to what they're teaching you as the audience about the leadership. So
Mhm,
I think this is something that I'm taking the most. We need to, if we want to be impactful, we need to bring ourselves as humans to that.
mhm,
Showing up as an expert and just blurting out your topic, yeah, people listen to it. You threw a couple of fancy statistic numbers there and research based on this and that, or like from this and that fancy research group, but that's it. People listen to that, and most of us will never remember that, and it
mhm.
will not make a difference in our lives. But when you bring yourself there as a human being with the faults, with the mistakes, with the passions, with love, with emotions, that really resonates with people. And that
Mhm.
what makes your expertise, knowledge stick and make an impact and a difference in their lives.
Yeah, I love that you share this because just recently was having this conversation both with my team, some members of my team on my sales team, but also I was delivering a workshop around this, and both times this question came up to me. And I love telling stories and the energy I bring, and the feedback was, Rob, why is that necessary? I feel like we're in this room, we're already here. That that little story is not necessary. And I thought it was really interesting. And I was like, well, I hear you, but I disagree. But give me more on your thesis there. And they were talking about, we're already in the meeting, we're already in the room with it because it's all about really it's related to sales and um the art of small talk. And it's for all the guests on both sides, my team and this workshop were all Europeans, right? And of course they look at me as the big American, confident, overconfident, we overshare. It's the American thing. And I reverted back as we went through this both times, this conversation. I used the same line, which resonates with what you shared. And it's from Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said, but they won't forget how you made them feel. And the idea of using the story, and I asked the question, yeah, but did that story make you smile? Yeah, of course it did. Cool. I got you to a place to be ready to receive what I'm about to actually say, right? And when in the world of Chat GPT and other sources in Google, if you want to be an expert, you can Google the shit out of it and find it, and you can re-say the things. The difference in that is the seasoning, right? AI doesn't have flavor. It tells you the impact and the things, but it doesn't have flavor of the lessons that we as humans go through. And it's those things of coming in your message of being human and showing up as a human that makes the difference of will they remember this or not? Will they remember how it made them feel? Did they learn something? And I think you highlighted that so well. And that is something that you wouldn't have done this for 3 years and continued to do this for the 3, 4 years, I guess 4 years in total, if we look
Yeah, it's
at
pretty much
year to
for,
year,
yeah.
right? 4 years, if that wasn't continuously happening in that feedback. So I share that whole thing is a key lesson for anyone out there is you got to leverage and show up to be human because it's that authenticity. It's you being human that is what changes the game from what they hear and receive.
Yeah, I like it that what you said about that it's still not there to substitute us with this connection that we want to create in the world.
Yeah. So, we talked a little bit about, reflecting on the journey. We talked a little about the achievements and the guests and the learnings. When we look at moving forward, why now? As we close out this year, we're sitting here middle of December. This episode is going to either release before the holidays or right after.
No,
Why
it's
now?
actually
Why did
first January week.
first Jan? So why now? Why did you decide that as we head into 2025 and we start
Mm.
2025, now is the time to say, I'm stepping away from this after 4 full years, 205, 6 episodes.
It's been a big surprise to myself, Rob, that this realization came. So you know yourself, or we've talked about the podcast. You've paused yours, uh, the bare necessities, even though it has been a great show, but it just didn't feel right for you at the moment. And I fought for my podcast. I really, literally fought for it. When my mastermind friends would say, like, Anna, isn't it too much on your plate right now? Maybe you pause the podcast. You can always pick it up later, etc. I was like, no. The coach would say it to me, you would say it to me sometimes, and I was like, no, podcast stays. I would be like stomping with my foot there as a toddler. And 2 weeks ago, I just was lying in my bed and thinking about things. I am usually very reflective in deep reflection mode in December, and it just came to me suddenly, like, I'm pausing my podcast. I'm stopping it. I'm not saying I'm saying pause it because I don't, never know. Maybe at some point it will feel right for me to restart it again or start a new one. Never know. But right now it just felt suddenly it felt right. And I've been reflecting on it why. And I think because I have different outlets for doing what I did. Going back to your first question, why did I start it? I wanted to bring this long format. I wanted to bring the depth of the conversation, and now I have different outlets to do that. So, for example, from teaching, you called me a professor. I'm not a professor. I'm not don't have the academic degree for that. But yes,
I
I'm
know, but it's
teaching
still
at the
fun.
university. Yeah, I know. I have a professor level at home, so I can kind of write on his title. So maybe it is because I do a lot of work with students and teaching there, so I get to express myself in a longer format, trying to engage them in the conversations. I've been doing the corporate training for 2.5 years, thanks to you introducing me to Numa. They're beautiful collaborator with a lot of workshops that are fun and fulfilling. So I feel like right now that pot or that need of mine is somehow closed.
Mhm.
And because of that, it felt right. And it just it's not about that it's too much on my plate. As I said, whenever it was too much, podcast stayed. I might have paused it for a month just to get a breather and etc. But it would still work. And now it just feels like it has done its job for now. This
Mhm.
chapter feels closed.
Yeah. Well, I really think that this is something that is huge growth from you because if you look at all the things and not only the teaching and the corporate training, but also reoccurring slots at Web Summit, hosting stages and doing workshops and panels and some of the things that you've been able to be a part of and going and doing workshops for retreats and different groups. When you look at what the podcast did and how it leveraged, you've honed your skills to be able to do these other things. And I think there's also a time when the impact that you feel that you want to continue making is felt in different ways. And that's when I think that's when it's time to say, hey, I want to focus on where my impact can continue to be felt or where I feel and getting life energy from on the impact side. And that's big because the podcast is a cool thing. It is a cool medium. It is a way to share your voice and be out there. But to have that kind of mental shift of focus, I think is huge growth. And it's going to open up new doors and new things and even more opportunities. So I think it's one of those things where we can look at it negatively. Some people might look at it negatively, but positively, I feel that I've done my job with what I set out to do. And it's honestly taken a life of its own for the last 4 years.
Mm,
And I think it's okay to take a step away because you're right. Maybe you never come back to it. Maybe you launch a new one. Maybe you come back and revitalize it, but it's still there.
mm,
And that I think is something that you can build off of that's really cool.
yeah, definitely. It feels right. I'm both sad and happy. I feel happy with this, but also light at the same time. But most of all, I feel that it's the right decision for me right
Yeah.
now and for my audience as well.
I always have wondered this. And, when you talk to athletes or musicians and you see when people decide or talk to professionals when they decide to retire, and you always ask that question, how do you know when it was time? Or how do you know when it's time to quit a job or whatever? And, sometimes you just know. And you can't put the right words to it. And people might question, well, you're on the top of your game. Why stop now? sometimes you just know when it's time to step away. And that's something only us as humans. And what I love about this is that and more people need to really listen to themselves and feel confidence in their own ability to make decisions. Because so often when in today's digital age, when we want to make a decision, we call 100 people because we
Mm.
need that validation that we're making the right decision. But the best decisions are the ones that you know inherently is true because you listen to yourself. And that I think is a lesson that so many people are afraid to do because they're afraid to listen to themselves.
This feels emotional when you listen when I listen to you now, Rob. That feels it brings a new perspective to me with this decision that I have learned to listen to myself and respect it and go for that feeling and with that feeling, even if it doesn't make sense on paper.
Mhm.
I've had the processes. I have good team. I have people wanting to join on as a guests, etc., etc., etc. I never run out of topics for solo episodes. So why stop? But it just felt right, and I don't know why, but I do believe that it is so that I clear up my headspace, my time for something else that is just around the corner. I don't know what it is, but I want to be able to say yes to that when it comes. Or maybe, you never know. Maybe it's suddenly there is something happening with the health or in a personal life, and this is just preparing me to for the blow to be smaller. And being able to say yes to those feelings, like acknowledge them and follow them, is a huge step for me. It hasn't been there all the time. I've been taught to not do that, and I honestly want to pat myself on the shoulder now after what you said for being able to do that. That my journey has come that far.
Well, you should. And I think that is something that as we did this interview and we went through this process, and when you asked me, was something I really wanted to highlight for you as you end this journey into what's next, because it's something that may not always be easy to be seen or felt. And so you deserve all the kudos for that.
Thank you.
As we start wrapping this up, when you think back on the podcast, is there a single topic or something that you always wanted to talk about that you maybe felt you weren't worthy to talk on that you wish you had brought up or you wish you had discovered or you wish you had covered with this podcast? Or do you feel that you've fully squeezed every juice out of the lemon?
Oh, definitely not all the juice. There is still a lot there. There's still a lot of juicy material there. But I think what I didn't bring is this depth that one-to-one can bring, real time when you know that no one is listening and no one will judge you. Uh, that no matter how much I tried to bring some aspects of that, that would never be there. And that's something I cannot really bring to the podcast. I still haven't figured out how to. So this is a bit sad, but also in a way sweet because this is the beauty of creating human connections. Like I feel like you're a super dear friend to me. I've never met in person.
Mhm.
It's mad to me how much we know about each other, personal lives, whatnot, the fears, the aspirations, etc. But we've built that through online conversations.
Mhm.
But that would never happen if those conversations would have been on record and when we would let them be listened to by anyone anywhere in the world. So there is a lot to say. I have a lot to share, but I think the podcast format is not the medium. And maybe that is partially the reason why it feels right now to stop it as well. That I do want to bring more of that. I maybe am more confident with how much I have to say, which does not fit in the podcast
Yeah.
format.
I think it's a great answer. And, I think that's a really cool takeaway and something that you're going to explore still. And at some point in life, you're going to be able to talk on that. You're going to be able to share that in some medium, some form, some shape when you're ready. So that's super cool. And I appreciate you kind of sharing that. It's really easy to kind of say, oh, yeah, I wish I covered this or I wish I'd done that, right? Instead, you actually take the time to really highlight. So I love that. If you could, I'll ask this question. If you could summarize this journey with a word or a short phrase, what would it be?
Passion child.
Explain.
The podcast was born out of passion for depth of the conversation, for openness, for learning from each other through genuine conversations. So that passion was the kind of that seed from which it grew. But as hopes as every child, for every parent hopes that they will grow up into adult and will go and do their own things. And that's what I feel right now, that my child has gotten to that place when they're leaving the nest and getting out of my control. And I'm here to just watch watch it um, take a different shape, take its own life, and it yeah, it does feel bittersweet. I'll miss this kiddo. At the same time, I'm happy we've had the time together and I made space for it in my life.
I think it's a really amazing short description of what this podcast has been and a good summary of why it's time and what's next. So with that, what's the final message that you want to share with your listeners for all those that have gone through the ups and downs and listened to one or two or 200 episodes? What's kind of your final message as this will live on, this episode, this podcast, you'll be able to go back and listen, still have clips that can be reshared, things that, the long tail of it. And
Mm.
if somebody's listening in a couple of years from now or tomorrow and they go back and they listen to it, what's that lasting message that you want them to remember or take away?
I want you all genius leaders to remember the people who make your life rich. And not only remember them, let them know that they are the richness in your life. It can be a random act of kindness to the barista who always smiles to you when you get your morning coffee. Just thank them for that extra smile. Give them extra thing for that. It could be your life's partner. It could be your parent, your kid, your best friend, a colleague of yours, whoever. Let them know that they make your life rich and full and colorful. Because we do it too little. In our busy lives, through technology, we forget about those little things. But those little things are the big things that really matter and make our life full and complete. So pause now or listen for the last minute here and then reach out to one person. Give them a call, send a message, voice memo, just say that you appreciate them and be specific. What exactly do you appreciate about them being in your life?
It costs absolutely nothing to be kind. And that's something that we don't do enough of in this world. And I really appreciate you letting me be the one to guide you through this last episode. And with that, we close the chapter of Genius Leadership. So, how do people continue to follow you? Where do they get in touch with you if they still want to reach out, connect, learn more, or just follow your journey on what is next?
LinkedIn is my platform. I'm not really active on the others, but LinkedIn is the platform where I feel comfortable and home and like I belong. So I'm always happy if you reach out there. If you have any questions, if you uh, are wondering or struggling with anything specific, let me know about that in the messages, and I'll happy to send you a relevant episode because we now have over 200 of them. They're still there. So LinkedIn is the place to go.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll make sure to have the your LinkedIn and also your website, which also has all your contact information in the show notes. So all you got to do is click those show notes, open it up, send her a message, text, voice, video, whatever. Um, Thank you so much. This is something that for me is also fulfilling in a way. As you know, we talked about when I paused my podcast after 105 episodes, so 100 short
Mm,
of yours. Um, I never did this. I thought about it, but never did, and I felt like I never got to close out that chapter. So this is also fulfilling to me
mm.
to do this through you. So Thank you for being a part of it. For all those out there, if you ever want to get in touch with me, robnapoli.com, you can find all my contact information there. With that, Anna, we close the chapter on Genius Leadership, Overcoming Everything. Thank you so much for guiding us on this journey, sharing your thoughts, being fucking human, and being open and driving great conversation. Something that I have really enjoyed to be a part of as a guest, be a part of as a listener, be a part of as part of the community, be part of as a client, and being a part of as a friend. So thank you.
Yeah, a huge thank you to you, Rob. It means a lot to me that you are the one closing this chapter with me. You asked about the favorite human or favorite guest. You're definitely the one who has recurred the most here. So and it's not an accidental thing. So we'll put in the show notes both of the, or actually 3 episodes, because we also had a mind-shifting moment before the second episode. So 4 episodes of the 205 are with Europe. We'll link those here in the show notes. And to you, Genius Leaders, I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. This journey is ending, but if you want to stay in touch, you know how to do it. And as always, I want to remind you that I see you, I feel you, I love you. And I do believe that we do need to listen to our gut feeling when it feels right to close a chapter, to start a new one, etc. So reflect on your chapters and close the ones that feel right to close right now. I'm not going to talk to you next Wednesday, but keep in touch the other ways.